Before we begin, we want to know where you're watching from. Comment your country or city, and tell me if you've ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life. Your comment might inspire others, because even though the world sometimes feels cold and indifference seems to be the norm, there are gestures powerful enough to break that barrier and spark hope. And today, I'll tell you how a single dollar triggered something much bigger. So get ready, because this story isn't just about Clint Eastwood, the famous actor and director. It's a story about life itself, about how a small gesture can make a difference and transform a destiny that once seemed sealed. Imagine walking through an ordinary city, immersed in your daily routine. The sun gently warms the sidewalks. The breeze caresses the faces of those rushing between traffic lights and shop windows. The sounds of the city form a chaotic symphony: honking horns, hushed conversations, hurried footsteps on the pavement. Amid all that noise, most people walk with their eyes fixed ahead, lost in their own world, without truly noticing what's happening around them. It's easy to ignore the stories hidden in every corner, especially the ones that aren't pretty, the stories of struggle, loss, and sometimes surrender. But every now and then, something happens that breaks the script. Something so unexpected and simple that, in hindsight, it seems almost miraculous. And that's exactly what happened that afternoon when a homeless man reached out his hand and asked for $1. It wasn't a special day. There were no cameras recording, no expectant crowds. It was just another afternoon in Los Angeles, the city where dreams are built and shattered with equal ease. The sun shone with just the right warmth, without being oppressive, casting long shadows on the sidewalks. On the terrace of a cafe, a man sat with the calmness of someone who's lived long enough not to be impressed by the hustle and bustle of the world. He wore sunglasses, but his presence was unmistakable. Though the years had left their mark on his face, the intensity in his gaze remained intact, as if time had respected that particular spark that made him famous. That man was Clint Eastwood. Even those who weren't particularly fond of cinema could recognize him. His presence commanded respect, not out of arrogance, but because of that unshakable calm, as if he always knew something the rest of the world didn't. He didn't need to speak to draw attention. It was enough to see how he held his coffee cup, with the same confidence a gunslinger holds his revolver in a sunset duel. Around him, life carried on. Passers-by walked by, some recognizing him and whispering among themselves, but no one dared to interrupt his moment of peace. How do you approach a legend without feeling like you're invading their space? But there's always someone who doesn't follow unwritten rules. Across the street, a man watched the scene with tired eyes. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, but the kind that builds up in the soul when life has beaten you down repeatedly without mercy. He wore several layers of worn-out clothes, each piece telling a story of cold nights and endless days. His hair was disheveled, and his hands trembled slightly, though it was unclear whether from hunger, cold, or the desperation he carried like an invisible weight. That man's name was Kevin. In front of him, he held a small cardboard sign with words faded by time and the indifference of others. Any help is welcome. God bless you. But if you looked beyond the cardboard and the tattered clothes, you'd see something deeper. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was someone who had lost not only a roof over his head, but also the faith that things could get better. Every step through the streets was a reminder of missed opportunities, broken promises, and dreams that had vanished like the smoke of a forgotten cigarette in an ashtray. That day marked 3 full days since the last time he had slept under a roof. 3 days since his stomach had felt anything more than crumbs picked from forgotten trays in some corner of a restaurant. Hunger didn't just twist his stomach, it broke his spirit, eroding every last trace of hope he might have had. Kevin took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and nervously squeezed a small, worn object, a quarter, the last coin he had. He knew asking for help was always a gamble, like flipping a coin. In a city like Los Angeles, people walked past without looking back, as if indifference were a shield against the discomfort of facing someone else's reality. But that day, something was different, because among all the faces that passed by without stopping, his eyes met one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Clint Eastwood. For a moment, doubt settled in Kevin's mind. Why even bother, he thought. Why would someone like Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood icon, care about the insignificant request of a man who barely recognized himself in the reflections of shop windows? Logic told him to walk away, to look for someone else, someone ordinary, someone who didn't seem to have a perfect, successful life. But hunger doesn't understand dignity. It doesn't care about pride, shame, or fear. It only demands. So he took a deep breath and made a decision that, though he didn't know it yet, would change his life forever. With hesitant steps, he crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the pavement itself were trying to hold him back. The people around him barely noticed his presence. To many, Kevin was just part of the urban landscape, another figure in the background of their daily lives. When he finally reached the table where Clint Eastwood was enjoying his coffee, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Sir, could you spare $1?" And in that moment, the world seemed to pause. Clint looked up calmly, sliding his sunglasses down to the tip of his nose. His eyes, still filled with the intensity that had captivated generations on the big screen, locked onto Kevin. It was a gaze hard to read. There was no anger, no pity, just a silent assessment, as if he were seeing something beyond the obvious, trying to solve a hidden mystery etched in the tired lines of the face before him. Seconds stretched out, as if time itself had slowed down. Kevin felt a lump form in his throat. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe he should have approached someone else. Someone less intimidating. Someone who didn't seem capable of disarming him with just a look. He was about to step back to mumble an apology and disappear into the crowd like so many times before when Clint finally spoke. $1? He repeated, his voice neutral. He paused, letting the tension hang in the air, as if savoring every second of the moment. And then, with a hint of a smile at the corners of his lips, he tilted his head and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. Let's talk." In that instant, Kevin blinked, unable to process what he had just heard. Of all the possible responses, that was the last one he expected. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. And so with a simple gesture, a chain of events was set in motion. Events that would prove that sometimes, all it takes to rewrite a destiny is for someone, even if just for a moment, to look beyond appearances and see the person hiding underneath. Because as Kevin would soon discover, true magic doesn't lie in grand feats, but in small acts of kindness that, like sparks, can ignite hope even in the darkest nights.